Okay, Jen, I'm excited to talk with you today about a topic that I think both of us hear a fair amount about, which is why professors, even tenured professors, leave academia and where they go once they do. I'm sure this is something you've encountered.
It's fascinating because it's one of the things, not now, but like a decade ago when I was newer in this field, it was surprising to me because relatively quickly in my business, like almost immediately, I was working with professors who were trying to leave academia or reshift things in their career. Maybe leaving academia was something they envisioned. And I was like, what? But like, you have the dream job right there. And since now it's just like, of course, but I've I encounter folks over the years who are like, what? You work with professors? Right? They go through that same realization that I did. So yeah, I think it's an excellent topic, Tori, to tackle of like, why do professors leave academia? And the other thing that we can talk about too is, and then what do they do next, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think the goal is being to normalize that this happens in case there's anyone watching this right now who is faculty saying, okay, am I allowed to do this? Is it okay? Very much happens. Even though I know we tell the story that it's the end of the rainbow and you've finally gotten there. Yeah, it's okay if it's not as rosy as it seemed. And we'll talk about how that plays out with the folks who we see and that folks have options, right? Speaking to where they go, my hope is that we can provide some optimism and sense of opportunity for folks who are in that position and want to make a move.
Yeah. And to be explicit, you don't have to feel guilty about this, right? Forget this survivor's guilt stuff. But I got the job. I should stay here and suffer for all those PhDs who wanted faculty jobs and didn't get them.
Well, and it's really funny. Side note, this morning I was reading an article on employer loyalty and how employer loyalty has changed over the past 20, 30 years with the recognition that there's this belief in tenure that, okay, my employer's always going to take care of me. And if that doesn't always hold true, it may warrant a re-examination of the relationship you have with your employer and that sense that you've sort of given them that power to create space for you for the rest of your career. If that doesn't play out, you have to take some of the power back in finding your career path. So I do think that sense of loyalty that might have looked very different in the 70s is now something that's worth looking at and worth folks saying, hey, I don't have to be loyal just for the sake of blind loyalty. There are real dynamics to this that I need to navigate.
Yeah, okay. So let's say this person listening is like, you're right, Tori. I am in charge of my career. Okay. Why are some reasons that I would consider leaving academia? You start.
Yeah, well, and I think we're talking about some of them, we're alluding to some of them, but let's actually make them clear. One is just the reality doesn't match the expectations. You had this belief, maybe peddled to you by folks who got their faculty jobs in the 70s, of what it might look like, what the job might look like, what the security might look like. And the reality is you're saddled with a ton of administrative work. You're teaching over Zoom and don't have any student interaction. The research pressures continue and continue and continue, right? Funding gets harder and harder to obtain. And so these things that you thought would pale in comparison to your interest in your topic are actually stacking up in terms of the benefits and considerations not being so good. I also hear from faculty the amount of just navigation they have with their university admin. I don't think is something that is talked about. It's sort of this impression that there's this panacea, and I think that weight is something that doesn't match the expectations when you look at it in reality. I'm curious if you found the same thing talking to folks, Jen.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we could talk on this in so many different ways, but like the erosion of faculty governance, right? Like faculty members just have so much less say than they might have assumed coming in. When you're in your PhD program, you're doing it at an R1 or an R2 to use, US kind of parlance here, where your professors were teaching one or two courses a semester, and suddenly you're in a 5-5 situation. Maybe you got hired as a 3-3, but anyway, right? Also, maybe you did your degree, your PhD, or your postdoc at like a bustling college town or a big city, right? Where a lot of our most prestigious, kind of largest research institutions are. And now you're, I'll be unkind, but you're not in those places. And maybe that's not great for you. Maybe, I mean, right? We could go on and on and on and on. And I mean, obviously, you and I are white women talking about this, but there's sort of people who live in other bodies who, where there's parts of the world that parts of the US, parts of Canada that are less welcoming to them, right? And who they are as peoples, yeah, et cetera, right? So, what are we, so these are, yes, I'm veering into other categories, but I think generally we're talking about here, I guess two things, right? I'm connecting the job isn't what I thought it would be in a negative way. And also I'm bringing up a second reason of like, this is not the life I want for myself. So let's talk more about that, the life reasons.
Well, and it's funny, there's the reality doesn't match expectations. This is not the life I want. There was also a third one you were alluding to that I just want to call out. I'm in an actively toxic work environment, right? And that happens a fair amount in academia, unfortunately. And so acknowledging it and saying, no, if you're in a toxic workplace, you don't have to stay. On that life reasons point, on that second one, I've found that folks, if they move to, say, an isolated town for their job, their partner, their kids, their family move with them, there might be a point where their partner says, I don't want to live here anymore. Like, we moved here, great. I want to do other things. I want to be closer to my family. I want to be in a big city. And so the limited nature of that one position means that it doesn't hold up very well to life wants, life changes. And so folks who then want to make a move because of life circumstances changing may need to change their workplace as well. Even though they have that faculty position that may be going well, it doesn't necessarily play nicely with changing life demands and the fact that you may have a partner or other life wants that you have beside just this faculty position. You're
Yeah,
nodding,
so
but you've seen that too.
totally. So this might have nothing to do with the actual job, but I'll give an example that I've heard more than once of, it was great. I was having a great time, and the kids were like enrolled in good schools, etc. But my partner could never get a job. Like years later, still he, she, they, still never found work. And like it just didn't work for our family anymore.
Yeah, it's the two body problem that I think we talk about when folks are finding jobs and then assume that if they found a job, it's resolved. No, that changes, right? Like our demands from our life, demands, wants, needs, expectations, standards, all of those things change. And so it's unrealistic to expect that a job that actually doesn't have a lot of flexibility, right? In other corporate jobs, in corporate jobs, you can renegotiate, you can sort of redefine the terms. Academia is like, no, this is your offer. It's not going to change. And so if your needs change, it may get tougher to square with what you're being handed.
Yeah, so what do we got here? We got like a giant category of like life, right? Like life. We got this also like pretty big category of like the job just doesn't, it's not that the job necessarily sucks, but it's not really matching up what I want in my career. Then we've got what else?
Toxicity,
Oh
just pure
yeah,
toxicity.
terrible work conditions. Ay, ay, ay. I mean, you and I have we have so many stories. Like we have heard from so many people about this, right? Like it's really, and I'm sure both of us would acknowledge that bad working conditions are possible anywhere and everywhere. Obviously, capitalism, right? Hellscape, etc. But academia is this particularly interesting dynamic where it's frequently, I think standard, this is generally true, is super hierarchical, right? Super hierarchical, which kind of sets up a certain dynamic in relationships. It's very competitive. There are, right, and related to that, super scarce resources. Uh, Work hours, just there's more and more work to be done, less and less bodies to do it. Even if like nobody's trying to be an asshole, it's sort of built into the system a lot of the time. I'll stop talking.
It's funny, it's making me think of from my PhD research, this notion of why chimp hierarchies form. And chimpanzees have these fruiting trees that are monopolizable and varying in quality. And so the dominant is going to go over there and sit on the tree and basically the good tree and be like, these are my good foods and all the rest of you are staying off of there. And so it's got this hierarchical element to it that as you're describing that, you're like, okay, resources are scarce and monopolizable. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like the chimps. Right? There's a dynamic where academia, just because of the way the resources are, that they're scarce, that they're easily monopolizable, it fuels that hierarchy and fuels a potential for abuses of power and toxicity. And so for folks who are in those environments, it's okay to leave. It's okay to leave. It's okay to ask for more. And it's okay to recognize the toll that that takes, right? If you're not leveraging therapy, like leverage that as a resource because it can help you just recognize the toll that that might be taking on your health, your mental health, your physical health, and that it's okay to leave that type of environment.
Absolutely. And let me give an example here. So often we can, folks like us get annoyed, like me, get annoyed about like toxic tenured professors that will never be fired, right? Like we hear about these folks in the news all the time in all the disciplines, right? But imagine, so stop focusing on that one person who may or may not deserve to be fired, according to me. But imagine if that person is your colleague and has been your colleague for years and potentially is going to be your colleague for another decades, right? I mean, it's reasonable for you to start thinking like maybe that you need to remove yourself if nobody is going to remove the problem.
Yeah, and I think assuming movement, assuming others will fix it is unrealistic with a system that doesn't have to respond to for-profit needs, right? In a for-profit company, there's some amount of, okay, is this person actually delivering? Are they able to retain their employees? Are they able to deliver on objectives? There's a little bit more notion of accountability. Not always, but there's more accountability. Where in academia, particularly once you've got tenure, that accountability is extremely limited. And so it's easy for someone to stick around, even if they're not a healthy add to the workplace culture.
Yeah. And tell us, what's another reason, Tori, for
You're already alluding to it. Dollars, or yeah, it's Canadian dollars, dollars. I'm sure you've seen this with folks leaving to pursue more money. Certainly something I've seen.
definitely. I mean, there's a vast array of salaries, right? What people are compensated in academia. And I know it's not true 100% of the time that if you leave academia, you will make more money, but it is often true. That is my sense, speaking of folks in the US and Canada, depending, right? It's often true.
Well, and what I would say is just that you have more control, right? When you're a faculty member, your negotiating power, maybe you can go out and get a counter offer or go write a book or do something public that somehow gets you more salary from your university, but you don't have an infinite realm of flexibility where once you move out of academia and look at other options available to you, which we'll talk about, you can prioritize salary or other elements of this, like location and interesting work and all that stuff. And so you just have more choice, where really within a university, you have a couple of universities that you might be able to speak to, and you have a little bit of degrees of freedom to be able to adjust your salary or benefits. Maybe you could get yourself a shorter sabbatical window, right? Shorter window to next sabbatical, but your negotiating power for salary is often limited because you're working with a nonprofit and they don't have infinite resources to give.
Yeah, and what happens, and this is not a rare phenomenon, is that professors, let's say probably mostly women professors, who realize at a certain point that they are making less money, as professors with X number of years and experience in their department than the brand new assistant professors getting hired at. Why? Because, right, salary gets indexed to that very first offer that you took. And since maybe you only ever had one second right one offer, you're you're just stuck making anyways. Yeah, so like anyway, I just want to acknowledge that there's folks out there listening, watching who might be thinking like, well, if you're in this for the money, like, but that it's literally sometimes people are just not making enough money, especially when we consider the amount of debt that's common. Maybe less so for scientists, but it's really common for folks to have like six-figure debt levels, right? I mean, academia is a playground for the rich. I hate to say it, right? So sometimes you just need more money and you're not going to be able to get it with your not even keeping up with inflation. They're not even, you don't forget raises. It doesn't even keep up.
Yeah.
I'm ranting.
Well, and it's just in other areas, whether corporate or small business, whatever it is, the pay has to remain more competitive to attract employees. In academia, there's that scarcity and that bias of folks coming from already affluent backgrounds where they don't have to pay to attract the talent. And so why should they? Right? Where in those other organizations, they need to have competitive pay. They may need to have equitable pay. The tech industry was getting a lot of pressure around pay equity. And so now does all sorts of analyses and thought processes to get closer. They're still not there. But because of that external pressure, they have more accountability where universities really don't, right? University pay is not something at the faculty level that gets a lot of visibility. There are definitely, unions, grad students, postdocs who will go out and make visibility for pay, but at the faculty level, it's not often an active conversation. And so doesn't get as much scrutiny, as much accountability as pay equity in other industries.
And before we move on to okay, so where do folks go? Let's talk briefly about kind of these external factors that nobody predicts. And I know that you had mentioned in our like little past discussion the impact of the pandemic and how that may have had people kind of rethinking. Say more.
Well, and it's something that I saw a few years ago. It's changing now, but still exists, which is for folks who really enjoyed teaching, that in-person classroom, that feeling of seeing folks' eyes light up as they're getting a new concept or idea. Teaching over Zoom might not create that. And same as you're saying, if folks are teaching these 5-5 course loads, they may not get time to enjoy teaching. They may not enjoy it the way that they had thought. And so there are so many other places where they can apply those teaching skills that don't have to be in that type of setting. And so I think a number of faculty in particular following the pandemic felt that that Zoom teaching just wasn't holding up to their end of the bargain.
Yeah, yeah. And the other external factor that I'm seeing, so as we're recording this, it is the February 2024. And, we're a few months into the genocide. And I think that as there are some people in universities who are realizing things about their colleagues, whether their colleagues are saying things or not saying anything at all. And that is just weighing really heavily on some folks and quite understandable that you might be looking around thinking like, are these the people that I want to be, in professional colleagues with for the next few decades? Maybe not.
Yeah, and it's funny, the way I refer to this is often looking for colleagues where there's a values match. There might be some areas you disagree that are not core values, but if you disagree with your colleagues on core values, there's going to be a lot of room for that to get clicked, right? Where if it's okay, we're agreed on core values, but then we have a couple areas we disagree on implementation or other ideas, that's more tractable, right? It's not to say you should look for workplaces where everyone's the same, but some of those core values, it's really hard to be in a workplace where there's not alignment. And so giving yourself permission to choose a workplace where there is alignment. The last reason I want to call out just something I've seen just to normalize it in case other folks are feeling it is the lack of advancement. Funnily enough, once you get tenure, the only advancement is here's some more overhead work, here's some more committees, maybe you can go dean or something like that. But the type of advancement is not necessarily the thing you enjoyed. It's more administrative work. And so folks feel like there's no new learning, their work has gotten stale, they've taught the same course for 15 years, they've done the same research, they've gotten the grants. And so that feeling of, I want something new is strong when folks feel that they've had that staleness or that lack of advancement. So I want to make sure to call that out as well.
Yeah, I love that because one of the very first stories, that I came across with a professor leaving academia was, I don't know, like the specifics here, but that was basically her message was that the job was fine. It wasn't that the job sucked. It's just that she was kind of bored. And it's not even that she was looking for other opportunities, but that other opportunities came to her and she lit up with the possibilities, right? So it was like small r recruited. She was recruited by the excitement of outside. So it wasn't a this sucks, I'm burning it down, peace out, good luck, bitches. It was, oh, that's exciting.
Well, and so I feel like we're starting to transition to where folks go. Anything else you want to call out about why folks leave before we talk about where we've seen faculty members go once they leave academia?
I mean, I guess one thing to just mention, given the zeitgeist is politics. And in the US, in Canada too, right? There are certain states and provinces where more recent changes have made it more difficult for certain people to live and raise their families. Uh, uh, so, yeah, like all fair.
Gosh, it's interesting. I was thinking about values match with workplace, but values match with where you live too, right? And being asked to live in a place where you don't feel comfortable, where you don't feel that there are folks where you have similar values around you. It's really challenging. And it's something that I think is asked of academics because there's so little locational flexibility. And so I think it's an important call out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're raising a trans kid and
Yeah,
you don't want to, live in Texas, that's fair.
yeah, yeah. Ooh, it's challenging.
So,
All
where do
right,
people go?
where do people go? On that heavy note. Well, and so it's interesting. We've talked about a few of the reasons folks are leaving. Where we've seen folks go, I want to call out that sometimes folks who are tenure track or tenured faculty, sometimes they take the same paths I see fresh PhDs take when they leave academia. So they may go into one of the job titles that is common, a data scientist or UX researcher. They may come in at a different level. They might be a senior data scientist or a senior UX researcher, but faculty shouldn't think that those paths are unavailable to them. I have seen faculty move into those roles. Again, it requires a conversation around what level is commensurate with your skills. And that's something that faculty need to navigate with the type of role and type of organization they're looking at. But those types of paths that we see brand new PhDs going out into academia and taking, those are available to faculty too, from what I've seen.
Yeah, so that's great. And that's often, for the social scientists, even some humanities folks could go into those kind of industry business roles. I see a lot of folks moving into government, and the government is a really interesting place for PhDs because, the cultures vary, but it may feel familiar in terms of bureaucracy and administration, right? But there's a much more movement in government. So, an interesting thing in terms of professors specifically is that a lot of the time they will have more work experience and that kind of thing. That metric matters for government. So they may be able to enter at a higher kind of grade, right? I don't know what the numbers are, but they'll be like a 14 instead of a 10 or whatever. And so that goes for the US, Canada. So government, I think, is a really attractive place with strong salaries and benefits packages, right? And kind of permanence that is familiar and attractive to folks. Tory, back to you. What else?
Well, I'm personally curious, before we move off that, what's the sort of role or job title that you see folks go into government? Just because that's the area where I've placed the fewest folks. And I like what you're saying about like, hey, with your years of experience, you can actually slot in a great place. What type of roles are folks going into?
Yeah, so lots of like research roles, of course. I mean, government is also, has PIs, but I think just maybe a little bit less of that happening. Um, for more senior folks. But yeah, plenty of research of various kinds, analysts in the Canadian federal government, it's sort of economists and social scientists, right? This kind of analytical research work is very, very common. Policy analysts as well. That's common. I think communications generally is super common. Obviously, this all depends on your expertise. One of my clients works in HR, but you think HR, she does training and development, right? Like those are often housed. And of course, government has huge departments of all of that too. what am I missing here? I think there's a lot of folks that work in kind of programming. Governments deliver a lot of services and programs that kind of build resources. And so a lot of PhDs might slot themselves into that. And of course, there are, in some of the ones I've mentioned, some folks are subject matter experts. So you're an expert in, the social policies of various kinds, immigration, whatever, right? There's places where those are great fits for folks that have skills in whatever they're in. Um, as as well as folks that work closer to the politics um, in this, which is, and that it can include scientists as well, like lobbying for the interests of universities and science with governments at different levels, as well as both in Canada and the US, there are the funding bodies, the NSF, the NIH. In Canada, we've got the tri-agencies. There are PhDs who work in those roles to make the funding ecosystem run smoothly. I'm probably missing things, but that covers a lot of ground here.
Yeah, so many opportunities. And the only other one that came to mind as you're thinking that was also the communications side, communicating maybe technical insights, scientific insights to the public and doing that through government and nonprofits. Also something I've seen. One thing I want to call out that I see more often among faculty pursuing other opportunities than the fresh PhDs, not zero, right, but more often, is pursuing one's own business. So freelancing, some freelance contracts, consulting, starting one's own business. Often faculty have more of that opportunity to sit at the helm, right, to actually be the one who's steering the ship. And so moving into one's own business can be more natural. Not to say it's not still challenging, but it is something that I see more faculty comfortable doing because they've been steering the ship for a little while longer and they want to keep having that independence and autonomy.
Yeah, and there's definitely professors, this is more common among certain science fields where you might spin off a company, right, from something that started in your lab. So that it happens. You might end up hiring all your same postdocs and grad students, right, as staff members. Now, sometimes faculty do these kinds of things and keep their jobs as faculties because, depending, there might be ways of doing that, but sometimes they leave completely, take their IP with them.
Well, and it's funny, if I were thinking of a method to take for any faculty who might be watching this video and saying to themselves, man, some of this resonates for me. I don't like that my life is getting stepped on by my current work environment. I'm feeling like this is stale for me. I want more money. I would say the first step is always, can I craft something from where I am, right? Can I craft a new consulting venture that allows me new learning and more money? Can I find a way to make the place that I'm living work for myself, my family, whoever is included? And that if then you try that and it doesn't work, then you've got the choice of, okay, I can move away from this. I can move physically. I can move to a new role. So I often like to encourage that folks try to craft from where they are and then move elsewhere if they're not totally done. If they're like, you know what, I've had it, I'm out, like rage quit. Okay, then it's time to move on. But if you're at the point of, something's not really working, there may still be room to iterate and experiment where you are before then taking the choice to do something different. And those are
Yeah,
all options that are available.
absolutely, Tori. I think it's great advice for the folks who are not swimming in the toxic wastewaters yet. Hopefully ever. Yeah, I think that's a great thing. And the dream scenario is that you collaborate, you work with, you consult with while you're a professor, with people and organizations, and then you get recruited directly by them. And you may not ever have to write a dreaded resume. You might just get to go straight into an awesome opportunity because the people already know you and your work.
Well, and so if I were going to wrap up what we've talked about, because we've covered a lot of points here, the points just being for faculty, it's okay to look for something beyond what you have. If it's not fulfilling for you, if it's actively toxic, it's okay to ask for more. Folks are doing that. They're asking for more and they're finding new opportunities that fulfill them, that have a mission-driven commitment, that pay them better. And so don't ever feel, faculty, that you have to stay stuck somewhere that isn't serving you. You've very much got options available to you that you can pursue at any point in your career.
And yes, you can leave mid semester. I'm not a labor lawyer, but yes,
Yeah.
yes, you can. So,
Oh my gosh, folks feeling like they have to stay out of some sense of needing to finish, right? It's hard to acknowledge, okay, I want to close out here incomplete. But similar to PhD theses, which are never finished, they're abandoned. You might have to abandon one career to make the door open to something new. And so it's
yeah,
okay to do that, even if it doesn't feel like you've finished everything you want to.
yeah. I love the sense of control and forward momentum.
Yes. All right, let's end with that. Control and forward momentum. Woohoo!
Good luck,
Onwards, people.
everybody.
Yes, good luck, everyone.